Doron Agassi, MSW. First of all, I want to give a comment about things that made me annoyed, or the things that Dr. Kadman said. First of all, the places where we mustn't even dare to think are not the places that I would like to live in. I want to live in a place that we dare to think. Second of all, I don't think that...
You should take my word literally.
Okay. But it happens to be that not many people like Professor Milton have the grace to say what he says. And what I want to say is that I wouldn't like that will be a man, whoever it's going to be, that he will be the speaker of the children. I want to see research. Why don't we have research? I want facts. I want to see what really helps the children. Why 22 years in Israel and 50 years in the US and we hardly see research? I can't understand it. It's not unbelievable. The last thing about my comment is that I didn't like, Dr. Kadman, that you said that Professor Milton, well, he has the sympathy for the abusers. We have the sympathy for the abused. They don't get what they need to get. We don't help them. I get phones almost every day from families and individuals that are abused and they want help. And when they ask, tell me, would you report me? I said, well, I have to. That's a law. I said, okay, I'm not coming. I have a 16-year girl that said that her brother is abusing her. And when she asked, will you report me? I said, well, we have to. She said, I'm not going to come. You're going to kill me. My family is going to throw me away. I want help. Can't you help me? I can't understand a law. And I think it's against what the United Nations, we signed about, we had the convention. That we can't stop, we can't avoid helping children. That's what happens in this law. Not the abusers, the abuse. And to you, Professor Jerry, I have a very hard question. I think of you as like the small kids that said the king is naked. Okay? Either much guts or much naivety. That's it. But you totally believe in what you say. But my big question is, how come, I mean, in the story, after the small kid says what he says, everyone sees it and understands it. What happened in the US? That it takes so long. I mean, in the last, the children will so be grateful for you. All the millions of children that are going to be helped.
Maybe
what takes so long? Thank you.
More comments or questions, please. Esther.
I look at the issue.
Just say your name.
Esther Cohen, and I train child clinical psychologists. Some of my students are here because we have an ethics class and we've been debating some of those issues. And in our law, if you are a professional like a psychologist, the penalty for not reporting is double than that of any ordinary person, on the one hand. On the other hand, you don't have any kind of right to reason or make a choice in terms of reporting people who are already in treatment. And very often, the obligation to report really causes the termination of therapy. And so I wonder what you think about the larger obligation and the lesser shikul dat, discretion of a professional who is already established enough of trust with the patient that the patient divulges the neglect, the abuse, the problems, and how, you know, what is the reasoning behind the need to report then, and why isn't it given to the professional to decide whether this needs reporting? Okay.
Ingrid Cohen, and I'm the head of the Witness Assistance Program in the Rape Crisis Center in Tel Aviv. I would like to hear your thoughts about sexual assault regarding the Chovat.
Mandatory report.
We'll take one more if there is any. If not, we'll give 5 minutes each. And I'm keeping the watch. Gary, you first.
Well, let me do a couple historical footnotes here, I think may be helpful. One is that Kemp himself did not believe mandated reporting should go beyond physical abuse, and he didn't believe it should go beyond health professionals, and even physicians specifically. And I think that's, again, there was to be, besides that I obviously retrospectively commend his concern. By the way, he was also nominated for a Nobel Prize for the Battered Child Syndrome article. Although it's not great science by any means, but it's still a revelation. He was in fact interested in case finding, but it was case finding for a particular purpose and a particular set of instances. Even though this much bigger morass that developed, and Ruth Kemp's view, she unfortunately died a couple of years ago too. Henry died at a pretty early age. But she thinks he would have been horrified by the way the child protection system, or did think that he would have been horrified, developed. And he feared exactly what happened. Henry Kemp, by the way, was to many degrees also the discoverer of sexual abuse. But he was concerned that as this moved to as it does logically, any kind of harm to children from any source, that there would be this delusion system without having anything to go with it. It's interesting that only one state of the 50 that adopted, actually more than 50 because the territories did it too, adopted mandated reporting. Only one adopted an appropriation to go with it. And that was because they believed this was simply giving authority to do something with people they sort of already knew about. I think I'm not sure, sort of.
Can you explain what appropriation means?
Oh, I'm sorry. That in other words, there was no money that came with it. What happens is that because of the way that the research questions are really telling one, we know a huge amount of information about why people report, why they don't, when they do, where they don't, and it's because that's what professionals get concerned about. And one of the things we know is it foments civil disobedience. About 30% of known cases don't get reported by professionals who take a risk, in essence, in terms of their own livelihood and their own freedom, because they believe bad things will happen as a result of it. Not that they don't have an obligation to act, that in fact that gets in the way of it. And in the same way, we know have a huge body of knowledge now about children as witnesses. And why do we have it? Because we're trying to prove cases. And not in a much smaller body of knowledge about the factors that actually maintain and stimulate maltreatment in a broad sense, and what one can do about it. And again, there's a principle of psychology that doesn't get enough attention in my judgment, but I think is in many ways the big finding of contemporary social science, which is the fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error is that people in general, including professionals of various stripes, tend to grossly over-attribute behavior to individual personality, and to grossly underestimate the significance of situations, and to give, and that we're missing the reasons. So, and yesterday we were in nurseries in Tel Aviv, in a neighborhood where there were many children who were undocumented African immigrants and refugees, little children, 50 in a room, one caregiver. Any one of those, there could have been a report of neglect on. That wouldn't have dealt with the problem. And that's an extreme example, but the bigger problem is in fact true generally. So our colleague Jim McDonald, in this part of this side thing of the Strong Communities Initiative, did studies in which he drove through neighborhoods and just recorded off a checklist things that he could see or his assistants could see. Didn't talk to anybody. So this is things like whether there's signs that say what the neighborhood is, whether there's trash around, whether there are people on the streets, what they're doing, what their ages are, etc. And what he found was that after statistically controlling for what people think of as a good neighborhood, meaning how wealthy it is, after controlling for the property values, for family incomes, for the educational level of people living there, after controlling for residential mobility, which is another big factor, by the way, in maltreatment, that about 25% of the variation among neighborhoods in parents' own reports of the safety of their children in their neighborhood, in their own homes rather, in anonymous surveys, was accounted for by these things you could see in the neighborhood. And actually a little bit more of the variation in the number of instances in which children ended up in emergency rooms or in inpatient units because of injuries of some sort that might have been reasonably related to something dealing with the level of supervision and care that they were getting. That's way, way, way more than we get with any psychological profiles. It's saying what's happening is that in communities where people are so disconnected, so disengaged, so avoidant, that in our area, which is not a bad area that we were working in, but widely disparate in class and rurality and urbanity and so on, that about 1 in 5 of the parents that were interviewed, random samples of households, said that they knew no children in the neighborhood other than their own, could not tell you the names of any children in the neighborhood other than their own, that they couldn't tell you where they would get emergency child care if they needed it in the middle of the night, for example. We had a whole long list of, what if this happens? To whom do you go? 1 in 5 have nobody. They belong to no organizations, which in the United States is unusual. And about a fourth of the worst situations that people were in, the more likely they were to be isolated. But about 1 in 4 of the really isolated were college graduates in professional jobs. And that's our problem. And we have to do something to generate situations where in fact people can respond humanely, supportively, and sometimes with some oomph again. In your face, the control mechanism. Think about how smoking cessation and prevention has happened over time. You can do culture change, but it means you have to go at it in a lot of ways, and you have to keep your eye on the prize, as they say, about what this is about. In terms of sexual assault, the second historical footnote is that I'm guessing this is going to be a worldwide trend. In the history of the formal child protection efforts, the United States has been first. And that's not necessarily a good thing in this instance, it may be. But in any event, first in terms not just of the system, but of things happening, trends. And then you begin seeing in Western Europe, then probably in this part of the world as well as in Australia and New Zealand, 20 years or so after what happens in the U.S. So sexual abuse discovery happened about 20 years, 15, 10 later. But the same's true with all the other discoveries. In any event, what's happened in the United States is that there has been a strong decrease, and in every way people have it measured, of the incidence of physical abuse, a strong decrease in the incidence of sexual abuse. On the other hand, a modest increase in the amount of neglect, whether you're talking about self-report or you're talking about what comes into the formal system. And I think there are a variety of explanations of that. The one that makes the most sense to me, though, is simply that the things that we can say, stop it, the norm is out there. And it doesn't mean those things never happen. That's clearly not true. But it does mean the most effective way of increasing the safety of children in the aggregate with respect to this egregious misbehavior towards assault toward children is to repeatedly give the message and to do it demonstratively through criminal jurisdiction. On the other hand, for neglect, again, we're doing everything we're doing in the formal system makes no sense. And to wrap up, my concern about this, and the way I may sound extreme to each of is that the questions that are inevitably asked when you have a mandated reporting law take you in the wrong directions. Almost always, but definitely with neglect. That it doesn't have anything to do intrinsically with doing something protective for children. Even in the worst cases, it doesn't. That it's the obligation to act, not the obligation to report. And in terms of the question about the instances, for example, where families drop out of or won't participate in formal treatment, that's a perfect example of why a mandated consultation system is a better one. That at least for professional reports, that you want to use the resources that are in the community already. The ones where there's already alliances with families. But at the same time, again, there is a reason to say, even in quotes for neglect, that where there is a threat to personal security, there is a strong enough societal interest, a strong enough moral obligation, that we want to add extra oomph. Not that we want to interfere with the things that are already happening in the community, but we want to make sure those go to the top of the list. And I would argue that's a doable thing. It's not unlike changing the standard of care for just about anything. And we know health professionals, at least in the States, are responsive to de-licensure, they're responsive to civil suits, they're responsive to a lot of things that orient toward changing their behavior. It's not unlike strict liability jurisdiction in tort for physicians, where they themselves don't have to take out every sponge during the surgery, but they better make sure somebody does, or else they're liable in tort themselves, even though they weren't necessarily the individual that was directly negligent.
Easy.
Okay, very short and few remarks. First of all, Asha yourself mentioned a very important point which should be emphasized, and that in a way, the unique way the Israeli society is built, and maybe we should look into a special branch of societies which are multicultural societies. Because in a multicultural societies, norms is not sufficient. In a multicultural, because the diversity of norms, diversity of group, of fraction of society, and we have to remember, have to keep in mind that we are not British as well. Would we live in Great Britain? They have a term, a very beautiful one, called "it's not done." For Brits, it's sufficient to say it's not done, and in many cases it wouldn't be done. There is no similarity at all to such a concept, it's not done in Israel. Either it's legal or it's not done. And it has a lot of disadvantage, but it has advantages as well. The only way that you can convince a member of society to do or to avoid doing is to say it is illegal, or it is a legal demand that you, for example, report. And it helps a lot within a multicultural society, maybe in 100 years will become a normal society, a multipole, and then everybody or most of the people will understand what is done and what is not done. I have to say a word to professionals. Would it be psychologists or social workers or Shlom Banai? There are two dangerous situations which accompany professionals. One, that the professional is an impotent. The other one, which is more dangerous, that he is omnipotent. The idea that, and without having nothing against social workers or psychologists, but the idea that a psychologist will say, Smoch alai, I know how to stop the continuous abuse. I'm not saying anything about a case which was discovered through a treatment that 20 years ago I was involved in this or other criminal act or misbehavior or whatever. We shouldn't count on omnipotent professionals who say, I'll stop it. I'll, by my professional knowledge, by my skills, I know how to stop. I do not want to take the risk. And to the some examples that you brought, that's exactly the reason why we have this exemption committee. In some cases, I fully agree, in some cases, the criminal process or even some social services intervention is not the best way. It could be dangerous, it could be life-risking. And that's exactly the reason. And not in all mandatory report laws there is such a creation.
It doesn't work.
Whoa!
That's another question. Don't open it now.
It doesn't work.
It's another question. It's a different question, but one day we'll answer.
Okay, that's our next study.
The next symposium will be about Vadot talk.
So I believe that there is a way to deal with exceptional, but it still should remain exceptional and not the rule. And to conclude my thoughts and words, let me make sure, Dawn, that I'll never do anything to people who dare to think.
Thank you very much. Thank you, the two of you, and thank you.